That's what I'm talking about.
Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.
Gotta rock this place. Gotta rock this place. Rock this place. Rock this place. Rock this place.
Hello and welcome everyone to Data, Pharma and Fika, where we share knowledge, experience and expertise in the fields of data and pharma, but all while doing it over fika, which is a big Swedish coffee culture. So bring your cup of coffee, your tea, or whatever you prefer and join us in today's episode where we will answer the question, what if there is a vaccine for Alzheimer's? Yes, you heard correctly, a vaccine for Alzheimer's. We'll also go all the way back to see where a medicine starts out and what role data has in those early stage projects. Today, our guest is Ingela Nylander, who is a development project director at Alzinova. Alzinova is a Swedish biopharma company and a pioneer in the development of a vaccine for Alzheimer's. Let's get it started. Ingela, big welcome. I'm absolutely delighted to have you here. How are things with you?
Thank you, they are fine. I enjoy being here. It's good to be in town for once.
Indeed, I feel the exact same thing. We have been working from home for a while, so it's good to be in the office. Before going into the topic of Alzheimer's, we always have to address our fika, and today we're having toska bun, which is one of my favorite. I hope you get the chance to enjoy it while I ask you questions about how it is to work with Alzheimer's in early stage, how it is to work with data in early stage, and what a vaccine for Alzheimer's would mean to the rest of the world. So Alzheimer's disease is a neurological disease, and it affects so many people and families, and it exists in every society. More than 30 million individuals are diagnosed with Alzheimer's today. For those who aren't 100% sure of what Alzheimer's is, can you briefly explain the disease, the most common symptoms, how you might get it?
Yes, Alzheimer's is a neurodegenerative disease. It's a disease of the brain. So you see the symptoms, you lost the memory, maybe don't find your way around, you lost the function of doing ordinary things, and it degenerates slowly over a period of 7 to 10 years. You lose your ability to do almost everything, and it's a deadly disease. So usually you die within the 10 years from a diagnosis. However, Alzheimer's starts much earlier, before you get any symptoms. So usually Alzheimer's disease starts about 10 years before you get the diagnosis, and you're not aware of it. What happens is that we think, we are not sure, some proteins that you have in the brain, they start misfolding, they become toxic for the nerves, and they start destroying the brain. So slowly the brain degenerates, and eventually you get the symptoms and you get the disease. And there are two main proteins. It's the amyloid beta or the tau. For us, we are working with the amyloid beta. And this protein is present in the brain, and you can analyze it in the cerebrospinal fluid. And you can see the increase of it over time. This protein can clog together in what we call oligomers. And these oligomers, they are very neurotoxic. They also then form fibrils, which is commonly known as plaques, which is another sign of Alzheimer's disease when you look into the brain. So it is a difficult disease. It's diagnosed with the proteins in the cerebrospinal fluid and the plaques you can see. A lot of work is going into finding other biomarkers that you could analyze in blood, so you could follow the disease, so you can diagnose the disease easier, but we're not fully there yet. So it's a lot of work going into Alzheimer's disease right now.
Is it passed on from generation to generation, or can you get it by chance?
The most important risk factor is age. So the older we get, the higher is the risk that we get Alzheimer's. There is a component that is inherited, but the majority is not that. So the majority is actually getting older.
So it is a growing problem, a growing disease, since we're living longer and longer now.
It is. So more and more people get Alzheimer's. So it's really urgent that we find a cure. There are a couple of medications that can ease the symptoms, but doesn't stop the disease. So we have nothing today that stops the disease. A lot of research is going in there. A number of companies are working with antibodies towards these proteins. Giving it in high doses. They are in late phase, so it looks like we might be able to start treating this disease. We are coming there, but it's urgent that we get there.
So Alzinova, a couple of days ago, or actually about 2 weeks ago, you had a press release saying that you will be entering phase 1 very soon. You must be so excited. Big congratulations.
Thank you. Yes, we are really, really looking forward to this. We have been working on that for a long, long time. We were hoping to do that long time ago. So that's going to be really exciting. This is when we will start looking at, does our vaccine work in humans? We have checked it in animal models, but animals doesn't get Alzheimer's disease. So all we can see is that they produce the antibodies to the vaccine. We cannot check in animals that we cure the disease. We have been working a lot with cells, brain cells that are donated by patients that have died, and there we can see that we have an effect on the disease. But now is the real test. Does it work in humans?
Fingers crossed, but I am curious to know, where did it all start?
It all started in Gothenburg University. So the company was founded in 2011. It was researchers in Gothenburg University that started to look at these toxic oligomers and wondering how can we treat them. And to do that, they managed to do this amyloid beta protein. They locked it in a form so it doesn't form fibrils, it only forms oligomers. And by being able to do that and isolate that, we could also make this oligomers as a vaccine. We also have an antibody that is very, very specific. So that's how it started. And
Started with a theory at the University of Gothenburg.
Yes.
Does it usually start at universities?
Very often at universities, but also some big pharma companies have been, all big pharma companies have done research in this area for many, many years, but not being very successful.
Okay, so it can start in academia with a theory,
Yes.
but it can also start within a pharma company.
Yes.
What's unique about this is that you are developing a vaccine for Alzheimer's rather than a medicine.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, the antibodies that are in research or in development right now, you have to give them in very high doses. You have to give them in infusions and very often. With the vaccine, the theory is that you can give it less often to get your body to build the antibodies by itself. We call this a therapeutic vaccine. We don't think it's enough to just give it once. We believe we have to give booster doses regularly, but not as often, not as high doses. The cost will be lower to the society.
Is it something that will be given as kind of children and then later on in life, and then it will be erased from the face of the earth, hopefully?
Hopefully. It doesn't work like an ordinary vaccine. We have to give it regularly. I don't think we will start with kids, but hopefully we will start much earlier than when you get the symptoms. This is going hand in hand with all the research with biomarkers. If we can diagnose the disease earlier, we can start treating it earlier. All this takes time though, so the first step for us is to show that we can treat the disease when you have got it.
So the big question now, what would a vaccine for Alzheimer's mean to the rest of the world?
The dream is of course that we can get everyone to live a good life in their early ages without being worried, without having Alzheimer's disease. And it's not only for the patients that get the disease, but also for their relatives. It's so important.
It's rarely just the patient.
No,
It's
it's
the
the family,
around
it's
as well.
everyone around. Because this disease doesn't only affect the patient that gets it, it also affects everyone surrounding that patient.
So the vaccine for COVID-19 was developed in less than a year. This vaccine for Alzheimer's has been in preclinical phase since 2011. I'm wondering, why is there a big difference in the development time from vaccine to vaccine?
I think this is a very, very good question that many people are asking right now. First of all, the COVID-19 vaccine, it didn't start 9 months ago. They didn't have it specific for COVID because we didn't know about it. But the technology has been in research for many, many, many years. Even if some of the ways you make the vaccine hasn't been tested before, they have been researching it for many, many years. Now it has been adopted to this COVID. Then the second thing is, of course, that a lot of money has gone into the COVID-19 vaccine. The entire society has raised up and said we need this vaccine. So all governments have put in a lot of money and bought the vaccine before. So the companies didn't have to do it in a staggered way because people have helped them paying to do it. They share the risk in a way. And the third thing when you compare it with Alzheimer is that COVID, if you're infected, you have an incubation time of up to 2 weeks, and then you get the disease and you know if you got it or not. With Alzheimer's, as we said before, the disease probably starts 10 years before you get a symptom. And then to show that you have an effect on these symptoms, you have to wait at least 18 months, then you can see a slight effect, preferably even longer if you see a good effect. So that is really the reason it takes so long to develop something for Alzheimer's.
I think that's a great point that you're making, that the disease itself differs a lot from COVID to Alzheimer's.
Yes.
In Alzheimer's case, you have to wait a really long time
Yes.
in order to see if it's working or
Yes.
not. But are there any key learnings from the express development of the COVID vaccines?
It's hard to translate it directly to a disease like Alzheimer's disease. I think, however, for all of us, it's important to learn from it because there are other threats to the health around the globe. And I can see one of the biggest threats is actually the multi-resistant bacteria, where we don't take a big grip of. And I think there, if society, if different governments would also unite around that and start working on how do we treat multi-resistant bacteria when they start infecting us heavily, that would be great.
I agree with you. As you are progressing to phase 1, what are you hoping to see in that phase and how does it even look like?
Yeah, phase 1 in humans, I mean, we are going to translate from animal models into humans. We will look for safety. We will go into patients directly, a small group of patients. It's
How small?
26 in total. Some of them will get placebo and some will get the active dose. And what we are looking for is safety, first of all. We want this vaccine to behave as it should. It shouldn't be dangerous in any way. And we are looking for if we can boost their immune system to build antibodies. So that is the first thing. We give them the vaccine and they start building antibodies. And it's safe. It doesn't give any side effects. Of course, we will also look at biomarkers. We will look at cognition. But the main thing in the phase 1 is to see that the vaccine actually does what it's supposed to do and induce the antibodies.
What comes after phase 1? What phases, what clinical studies, and how do those differ from the first one?
First of all, it's more patients.
All right.
So from phase 1, you usually go into what we call phase 2, which is a couple of hundred patients. It can vary. And in phase 2, you want to define what is the dose we should have and what is the dose regimen, how often do we need to give it. and you test a number of different doses and dose regimens to pick the best one. Again, of course, you look at safety, efficacy, and all of that. But the main reason for the phase 2 is to find the best and the optimal dose and dose regimen. Then you have the phase 3, and that is where you have to prove safety and efficacy in a large group.
How large if we compare it to phase 1?
A couple of thousand patients at least.
Okay.
And there you have to have a statistical significant difference in efficacy, and you have to build up enough safety data to say that this is safe. And the amount of patients, of course, it depends on what is the endpoint and how good is the effect of the drug. So how easy is it to see the differences? And the differences shouldn't only be statistically significant, it has to be medically significant as well.
All right, so there are more rules that you have to kind of go by in order for phase 3 to be successful.
Definitely. I mean, you need to show in a good way that this is something that is worth putting your money on, and this will help people to get better.
Let's dream, you and I, just for a little bit. Let's dream that you are successful in each phase and the vaccine goes all the way to market.
Oh, wow.
How long does it take from now until it reaches the patient in market?
I mean, in general, we say that from you start phase 1 until you can launch on the market, it takes 8 to 10 years. So that is a normal time.
That's a long wait.
It's a long wait. In Alzheimer's disease, where we need to follow the patients for a long time to see a clinical effect, it could take even longer.
Wow. So as the project progresses, it's going to become bigger, as you just said, more patients.
Yes.
Which also means it's going to become more expensive.
Absolutely.
Will Alzinova be taking that on by itself or partnering up with another pharma company?
I think we have to partnering up with the biggest pharma company. First, of course, it's all the money we need, but also the resources and the build-up around the company. We are a really small company, even if we are growing, but to take this into phase 3, you need to have a full backup, you have to have a production plant, you have to have all of that. And it costs a lot of money. So we will partner with someone. We hope that.
We did see this kind of trend, though, in this period, in this pandemic. We saw that many pharma companies were cooperating in order to deliver a vaccine for COVID. Moving on to the last part of this interview, I want to understand how you work with data in early stage projects. There isn't that much data since you are in early stage. So let's start with the first question. How do you work with data in preclinical stage?
I mean, the data we have in preclinical is really important data because we have looked at toxicology. Is this a toxic compound? We look at efficacy in models and in cell cultures, as we talked about before. We also build up data on the drug substance and the drug product. How do we make this? How do we make it in large enough scale? How do we make it in a good way to give it to patients? How can we store it in a good way? Does it have to be in minus 70 degrees when we store it? Or can we find a way to keep it in room temperature? So all of that data we work on. And then we try to predict what is going to be in the future. We have to set up a hypothesis. That's about science. We set up a hypothesis, we test that hypothesis. But it's a lot of insecurity and it's lots of assumptions we have to make.
But do you set the tone right now, the assumptions you make now, the way you work with data now, does it set the tone for the rest of the project?
Definitely. I mean, that's what we have to do. We have to look at what do we want to deliver at the market. How can we reduce the uncertainty during these phases we were talking about before? And what do we need to do now to make it as big chance as possible that we can move forward all the way through?
What are the challenges that you see with data management in early stage and when making strategic decisions?
you have to make the decision based on very, very little data. You have to make the decision on a lot of assumptions. And it's so easy, and I've seen it happening in both in small pharma and in big pharma companies, that you make these assumptions and you carry them, as we said before, for many years, and you forget it is an assumption. You start believing this assumption is the truth. And then suddenly you realize it wasn't the truth, it was an assumption. So to remember that you're making assumptions about the future and that there always is an uncertainty, I think that is the biggest challenge, because we're not good at handling all these uncertainties.
It is very, very difficult, which makes my next question also very difficult, because you just talked about it. You talked about making a lot of assumptions, and there is a lot of uncertainty, and that is the reality for almost all drug development projects.
Definitely.
That they don't know what the future will look like. So you kind of assume that a clinical trial will take X amount of time and it's going to need X amount of patients. How do you deal with that uncertainty using data?
We have been looking at that as well, and I've seen it from both big and small companies as well. And usually you make a plan, you say this study will take 2.5 years. And the only thing you know is that it will not take 2.5 years. If I guess, I will guess wrong. So we are very lucky. We are actually working with Captoriosum now, and we can set a range. We are quite sure that this study will take between 2 and 3 years. And we can use Captoriosum to simulate both when it comes to cost, to outcome, to timelines, and it gives us the most likely outcome, but also the ranges. And then it becomes very evident that these are assumptions, and we can make these decisions knowing that these are assumptions, but this is, with what we guessed before, this is the most likely. So that has been fantastic. We have just started that journey, but we can really already see the values, and we can also work with multiple scenarios. If we go that way, or if that happens, we go that way, and being able to simulate all that and having a system that helps us remember it's all assumptions.
So that it doesn't become reality or just fact, because you kind of get a tunnel vision if you just assume this is the right way.
Yeah.
So you can make notes, this is an assumption. Is it easier to plan in that case? Because if you have like scenario 1, 2, and 3, and this is the results from each one, does it become easier to plan and strategize?
It is. It's easy to plan, it's easy to strategize, and it's more fun. And you can come up with more scenarios. You start thinking, when you sit in the group and start thinking what happens, what if, and you can analyze a lot of different things. So, and it makes it more creative. It's more innovative. So I'm just really happy that we are trying this out.
I'm so happy that you're feeling this way working with Captoriosum. Your reputation, Ingela, precedes you. You have such vast knowledge in this field and such a long experience. What advice do you have for other scientists and project leaders in early stage projects?
First of all, if you're in early stage, you have to plan all the way to the launch. You have to start looking at what do I want to say there, and then reduce the uncertainties that you can say that. Then you have to reiterate this, because it's not the truth the first time. You will learn things on the way. You have to be prepared to change all the way through. For smaller companies, I would also say that you should bring in someone that has experience of bringing it all the way, because drug development is a science by itself. If you come from the university, you have a fantastic idea, ensure you liaise with someone that has developed drugs before and know what it takes to bring it to the market.
So someone with experience, someone with knowledge.
Yes.
Another Ingela is what you need. This is actually extra close to my heart, so I am really, really rooting for you. I hope this vaccine is successful so that it helps the millions of people and families affected by Alzheimer's. If people want to support this development or want to help in the research for Alzheimer's, do you have any suggestions on how?
There are different ways to do that, depending on in which way you want to support it. If you want to support it with money, most countries have an Alzheimer's organization that collects money, and they support researchers at the universities and institutions to work on the basis science, to understand what is it behind Alzheimer's. They develop biomarkers, they validate things. So that is one way, that is to donate money to an Alzheimer's organization that bring it into the research. If you want to be part of a smaller company developing, then it's usually to buy shares. Most of these companies come on the stock market somewhere, so you can buy a small amount of shares. The third way is, if you have got Alzheimer's disease and there is a clinical study ongoing, participate. You might get a placebo, you might get an active drug, but you will help the research and you will help other people. There is also a possibility, because today we have studies that treat Alzheimer's. It's also becoming studies which tries to prevent Alzheimer's disease. It will mean that you could get into a study before you have the disease. And there is a registry which is called endalznow.org. And it's about 350,000 people around the world that have entered in there and said, if there is a trial, if I fit to that trial, I might be interested. And then you can get a note that, well, here in Gothenburg maybe we are doing a research on biomarkers and we need healthy people that hasn't got Alzheimer's, and we want to check what's happening with your biomarkers over the next 10 years. And then you could be part of that study and help the science.
I will definitely have that link that you just mentioned so that everyone can see it later on. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to explain to us how it is to work with early stage projects, how it is to develop a vaccine for Alzheimer's, the disease, but also how you guys work with data. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been really nice.
It's my pleasure. If you want to know more about Alzinova and their work, you can go to alzinova.com. And if you have any feedback or want to know more about how we work with data, you can go to our website, captaria.com. I will have all the contact information and the links in the description field. I want to thank you all so much for listening today. My name is Stephanie, and I'll see you next time.